Обіцяв, що ми в кінці травня будемо мати зустріч з геніальним музикантом, з дуже відомим музикантом і дуже хорошою людиною. І Бендік, як і обіцяв, він приїхав до України. В першу чергу, так як Іван Падуард, щоб підтримати нас. Бендік хотів приїхати, я щасливий, що з'явилася така можливість. Бендік.
It's fantastic to see so many young people, and it's okay to be older too, for those who are. And I'm very curious to get to know you a little bit, what drives you, what you're interested in it, and how you approach improvisation, which is today's topic. But in order to get a reiterative session going, I can start by just explaining a little bit about my background, if it's okay. So, like most of you, I started very young to play an instrument. I played the clarinet and the piano, and then I had a very formative experience. I went to a concert that I really, really liked, and I decided I wanted to become a good musician. I had no idea what that meant, and if I had known, I had never done it. But I didn't know, so I started to practice a lot and work hard, and I started to play at clubs at night with friends, blues and sometimes jazz, mostly R&B and popular music. I studied computer science, informatics, and philosophy. And then after some time I thought perhaps I should study music, because I do music all the time, so I studied music. But I studied contemporary art music, so classical composition, pling-plong music we call it sometimes, 12-tone serialism, all of these very modern techniques. I even went to Hungary, to the Liszt Academy in Budapest, studied there with Ligeti and some very famous teachers. But I never felt that music really engaged, that it communicated. I felt that it was sort of an intellectual game. And I wasn't able to express my personality through that music. And that's when I got really interested in improvised music. And already here I have a bias, as you can hear from the outset. My personal pursuit is that of the personal musical expression. There are many other ways of improvising, but to me, the most convincing way of improvising is, and the most interesting for me approach to it, is to try to expose my personality, to show an audience who I am. And you can see who I am now, right? Beard, old funny man, you know, too much weight. But who I am on the inside, that's more difficult to see from just with your eyes. We need music to be able to express that. So I said already now that I have a bias. So there are many other ways of improvising than trying to be personal, right? How would you approach it?
To improvise?
Yes.
I think I'm on that level that now I'm trying to copy someone else, some great musicians, and copy and trying to improvise my ideas on someone's ideas, like variate licks of someone and create some of my licks. But I think I'm now I'm not so into composing or improvising and like showing myself. I think now on my level it's more about copying.
Yeah. Imitating.
Imitating, yeah.
Yes. Can you all ascribe to that? That the approach is to imitate? Is that something you all do?
Well, yes, that's the way for us to develop something within us, so that we can play better and so that we can improvise better. But I believe the final goal is to show who you are on the inside.
Yeah.
And like anything else, I believe doesn't really work because it's our final goal to improvise, to show who we are, like our true selves. And I guess that something else could be, I don't know, maybe impressing others, but like at some point you will realize that that's not the right way, like not the true path.
You usually go to a circus for that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like
you pay tickets for other things.
Of course. So like.
But it's a lot of it in music. I agree. Yeah.
Well, that's the show business, most of it probably.
Yeah. And this is something that IGOR teaches you.
Well, in Ukraine, it's kind of a difficult question. Some do play pop music to to make a living, to gain some amount of money. Because with jazz, it's more difficult. Naturally,
it's probably the most common approach to jazz improvisation is imitate, emulate, innovate. Have you heard those three words in connection?
Yes.
So you use those, right? So you take something you really like and you copy it and you change it a little bit, or you put it in your rucksack as a dirty trick for a rainy day, you know? And then you sort of can innovate by taking different dirty tricks from different copying activities. So it's very similar to what you do on a computer, copy-paste. But I'm very glad we could establish it at the very beginning, that you all recognize that principle, because it is very important, I think, to sort of imitate, emulate, and innovate. It's a very good starting point because you learn fast, and of course learning through imitation is not only about the exact phrases on that exact song, but it's also connected to your instrument, to how idiomatic these phrases are, how well they belong on your specific your instrument of choice. So you can be a trumpet player and imitates vocal things or piano things, but perhaps not all of those phrases are as easily achieved on your instrument because it's made for and constructed by and applied for a different instrument. But what I wanted to talk to you about today was step 2 after imitate, and that never stops, of course. You always want to find out, when you hear something you like, what was that? What did it do now? You know, how can I find out? So that never leaves you. But the next step out of sort of establishing a more independent platform and actually exploring your own identity and your own personality is when you start to work with improvisational strategies. In other words, you try to have a plan for the improvisation. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about, how we could sort of make a palette, a sort of a menu, a la carte menu of different approaches to telling a story through a solo or through a group improvisation. consider that? Or do you, let me ask you, what's your name?
And
Anne. When you improvise, do you have a plan? Do you have a sort of...
I'm not so sure that it's a plan at all. I think it's first of all I'm trying to play not a lot at the beginning of the solo. It is the main plan, and try to play a lot at the end of the solo, and maybe play some rhythmics at the end, rhythmic pictures. At the end of the solo, yeah.
So it's sort of a dramatization. It's sort of a peak, a solo that goes towards a peak. And that's your, is that the way it becomes, or is that your strategy?
I think it's my, yes, it's my strategy.
It's voluntary, you want to. Can anyone else relate to what Anne is saying? That you're trying to build up to a climax, sort of?
Yeah.
It depends by the
It
form
depends.
of the song.
Yeah, it depends on the next soloist or maybe on the scenario.
How I'm interested in that. How does it depend on the next soloist?
It depends if I am a composer or arranger, I want to make solo going like a little bit.
Oh yeah, so there are instructions.
There is a scenario.
From the arranger or composer. Yes.
The main idea of the whole thing, to build this way or another way, it can be like this also.
Yeah. It was interesting because I worked many years in the United States with different jazz musicians there, and they have very much your approach to very often your approach to soloing. And then for many years I studied Indian classical music, which is also improvised. And they have a very, very different approach to solos. And what they should contain and what kind of form and shape, what story they were telling. Because what story is the sort of very little in the beginning, more and more dominantization, more and more rhythmical. What story is that telling?
It depends of the day. I'm telling different story, different days. I think if it's rainy day, I can play a little even at the end of the solo, or maybe if it's like different style of music of jazz, it can be a more dramatic solo or more happy solo.
Yeah. So there are many parameters within that form, that sort of that narrative shape that you chose. You can play major, minor, you can play happy, sad, you can play very rhythmical and less rhythmical. You can use different parameters in different ways. So if you, what's your name?
Sasha.
Sasha. If you were to play a solo after Anne, what would you think of them? When Anne has created this fantastic, just to use a silly, simplified allegory, it's about the man or the woman who goes up the mountain, right? And then at the top of the mountain says, "Woo! Next soloist, Sasha." What would you do then?
Maybe I will start from the beginning.
Yeah, so you start at the bottom of the mountain.
Start to tell people about what I see now.
Yeah. What do you mean, Sasha? What you see now?
I climbed the mountain.
She climbed the mountain. You haven't started yet. So you're playing a solo after her. What's your instrument?
Voice.
Yeah, so you sing a solo after her sort of mountain ride.
I I don't know.
I mean, there's no. I'm not trying to arrest you here. I'm just curious about what. Oh, so it's and it's whoa, and everyone's wow, that was fantastic. What do you do? What's your approach then?
Continue to sing in that mood,
That high plateau, or to go down again, or
I think down,
yeah,
and then
build
go
it
up
up
again.
again. Yeah.
Climb your own mountain.
Yeah.
With something else.
Yeah. Some would say that this is the narrative of the male orgasm. That would of course be a very crude explanation of it, because it contains the male orgasm can contain quite a lot of different rainy days and sunny days too. So, anyone else? How would you? Is there anyone else, or are you all in accordance with Sasha? That you would sort of. Yes.
I think maybe next solo will be some rephrasing of what was the goal of previous adventure. Maybe some again rephrasing of what do you think of this journey adventure?
Yeah.
Of this story. What do you think of this character?
Yeah. So do you mean to take perhaps some melodic motifs or something from what she's doing?
Yeah, maybe you can tell people what do you think of.
Yeah, but because I mean I'm just thinking aloud here. But if you think of music as sort of the opposite of competition, your job, if you're playing a solo after Anne, would be to make her sound even better, right? Because if you do the same thing that her and you do it even better, you'll make her sound lesser.
Yeah.
But what you actually want is to help her
Yeah.
sound better, and that also helps you. And perhaps that's better achieved through contrasting what you did than through repeating what you did. What I want to talk to you about, we can talk about intellectually, although it has to be demonstrated through a musical language. But we can discuss improvisational strategies. And when I look at you, you're so young. It's a fantastic gift. Of course, you never see it as a gift when you are young. But it is a fantastic gift to be young, because you can try out different things, right? You're not tied to yourself. You're in development, like you were saying. You're trying to become better. So you can use all the tools in the toolbox. They're there for you. And they're also there for us that are elder if we want to develop. But that's what I wanted us to discuss now, to find different strategies into a solo. And I think what you're saying, Anne, is the exact answer that I was hoping for. Not because it's wrong, but because I recognized that when I was a student, I thought exactly the same way. Mm-hmm. I have to be smarter, start. And then, it becomes organically sort of a quest for more, or for some kind of resolution, some kind of satisfactory result, right? But you don't have to strive for that. You're in this luxurious situation where you can actually say, you know what, I'm going to try out something I never did before, and see how that fits my sensibility, my personality, if I might use such a ambitious word.
So you think it depends on the context of the song, or on your personality at all?
Well, I think what I'm trying to say is that there's a certain luxury in not having found your personality, because then you can try out different things in order to see where you feel that your true comfort zone is, right? And that's what I want to discuss with you.
Not to find personality.
Personality is there. It's not to be found. It's to be dug out, right? It's in you already. But you're not really familiar with it, and you cannot really. And when you're young, and at the same time you have to learn an instrument, you have to understand the chords, the rhythmical patterns, all this complexity. The last thing you can think about is how does this fit with my personality? You know?
Yes.
So that's why I'm saying it's a luxury to try to say to yourself, today I'm going to tell the story of that poem that I read this morning. You know, how can I translate that into or today I'm going to sound like I'm a bass. Or today I'm going to sound like I'm a drummer. You know, just shift perspective all the time. And as we were talking about earlier, today I'm going to do the opposite of what the first soloist does. So if you play with the climax, I'm going to do a female orgasm. I'm going to do, you know, many small climaxes instead of having one big one. So challenge not only yourself, but challenge also your fellow musicians, because that's part of the game. Not only to make you sound better, but to make the whole group sound better. Now, if I play the solo, everything's fine and everything's, you know, really beautiful, and those lines are fantastic. It's just a very even 8-note solo. And if I was to play after someone who played the solo like that, I wouldn't play because, you know, for the fellow musicians and for the audience, the ears, they close. You just, you know, you've had it with daga 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 daga. It's like, you know, and the whole purpose of an improvisation is to buy yourself time all the time, and to make the listener sit at the tip of the chair, to be engaged. What's coming next? Well, you know, then it's okay. You see, that's the whole game. If you can challenge your fellow musicians, yourself, and the listeners, then you're creating something, or at least trying to create something. There's a lot of research on how people experience music. Are you familiar with this? What we search for, I think this is true for all kinds of art, and also true for the cityscape and how we experience the reality. We have to establish something that we are familiar with first. If I come into this room and it's beep, boop, 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 I feel insecure. But if someone plays doom, chick, doom, chick, doom, I feel at home. It's something that I know what is. So that's step number one. Create confidence between the musicians and between the musicians and the audience. But we all know that that's not enough. You also have to challenge them, right? So this mix between familiarity and novelty, that's where music appears. And your role, our role as musicians, is to know exactly when the familiar has its limits, and also when the novelty has its limits. You can disagree with this, because there are, of course, Adornos and modernist aestheticists that will say that's bullshit, because music should only challenge. But I'm not talking about aestheticism, I'm talking about research on how people perceive music. And that's good to know, regardless of what kind of aestheticism you're trying to let direct you. So, we should have had a blackboard. Let's start to think of strategies. Different strategies than the male orgasm. Great. What would be a challenge for, what's your name?
Marina.
Marina. What's your weakness musically?
Weakness?
Yes?
My ears, I think.
Your ears?
I'm not so sure in harmony.
Okay.
Yes. And I think it's my...
So that's where you probably have the most to gain.
Yes.
So you could have, how could we have a very harmonic approach to solo? There are many, many ways. I'm just asking you to, raise your hands and come up with one or two. Yes?
So for instance, you have a rhythmic idea and you develop it, but you don't overdevelop it like you said. So like playing straight eighth notes throughout the whole solo, that won't be interesting. So you have to variate it rhythmically. You also have to have a few melodic ideas that you could play from a different note, for example. So you will have some sequences. You will have some rhythmic variations, for instance. So there is no one way to do it. That's the beauty of improvisation.
What we are looking at is very good what you're saying, but it contains 10 different approaches, what you're saying now,
Okay.
But in the way I wanted to present it now, but I think you're right on track, because you could take one melodic phrase from the song that you're presenting and try to move it around so that it fits, make a contrapuntal, as we say, arrangement of it, where you keep the same intervals, but you move them around through the harmonies, and that's a very stubborn approach, but it's a very deep, learningful approach, because you get to know the harmonies and the possibilities that are in them. That's what you mean, right?
Yes. If we only talk about one thing, only one strategy, then that's very useful to get into the harmony and deeply learn it.
Exactly. And it could be a phrase that Anne or Sasha just played, and you take it on in your solo, but you develop it further. But only with the rhythmic constraints are the same, and the intervals are the same, but you move it around through the harmonic spectrum. So you create a horizontal line in through the vertical grid, right? What are other approaches to harmonic improvisations? Can you think of one?
It could be phrases, So once you've transcribed something, you could use that phrase in different keys. That's probably easiest way. Once you know one phrase in 12 keys,
Yeah.
you could really like play it around. It won't sound the same. It won't get boring as, for instance, one sequence. So it will be more interesting, if you ask
Yeah.
me.
Are any of you familiar with, Lenny Tristano, his approach? Tristano?
His approach.
Yes.
I've only heard of him as a musician. So
Yeah.
what about his approach?
No, he uses this all the time, but he uses it to create new melodies out of the existing melodies. And it could be, using triads or sixths. So you play harmonically, but you change it to another spectre of the harmonic picture. There's also people like George Garçon. You know about him? Oh, this is a very much used technique in American jazz, where you use triads and you change triads and you intersect them. It's basically like 12-tone music, only that it has a little, it has limitations. Well, you can develop the motives, right? So you can take one motive that's very clear, either from the previous soloist or from the material you're improvising over, and you can develop that motive freely, but you constantly return to it, and then you develop it again. So we have, and you can do the same thing, but based on the rhythmical pattern, right? So the rhythmic phrase is the same, but the notes are all different, right? So you tie one parameter and you open up another one. You can also do it based on form or the shape. This is the sort of shape that the melody has. It goes up and it goes down and it goes towards the end. And you can use that, but fill it with totally different harmonies. That's sort of also a very melodic approach too. That's where the melodic and the harmonic approach sort of coincide. So what I'm thinking about is that because I use this a lot, instead of just, it's my time, it's just, what do I want to try to develop now? How can I, and of course, to have a strategy like that is not a wedding ceremony. It's not something you're tied to, right? You can be unfaithful to it. You hear that some other ideas appear, and you might want to go, but it's a start. It's to focus your sort of entrance into the solo in order for you to sort of have an idea. And that idea could very easily dissolve and you end up with a climax anyway, but you start in a different point than you would otherwise. So you sort of use your head a little bit, your analytic abilities, in order to push the music forward. talk about how you can consciously develop a very, very simple language on one hand, and on the other hand, a very, very complicated, complex language on the other, and how you can bring them together. Because that's where, and then this is what I've learned through working with Indian music. This is what they do in Indian music all the time. You go in and out, and this is the exact same phenomenon that I mentioned that we have a lot of research on in terms of how people perceive music. It's again the familiar and the novelty, the right blend of the two. So when Indian musicians play, they can come up with the most intricate phrases, rhythmically, harmonically, melodically, and then they can contrast it with very, very simple phrases. And this buys them time, you know, because you don't get tired of listening to it. It's not something playing for 15 minutes. It's something playing whoa, whoa, and then you see how that buys me time? Just that simple demonstration like that. And the master of this in jazz music is John Coltrane. If you listen to his solos, you'll hear that he cries the blues. He's deeply, deeply rooted in something truly personal, and more than personal, something political, something that has to do with the roots that are so incumbent in him, so important to him. And then he contrasts that with a very, very original and complicated intellectual language that is very, very virtuoso. So it's not about being virtuoso, it's about contrasting the virtuosic with the very, very simple. So he sings the blues and he plays the jazz. And that's when you can do that within the confines of your personality. That's exactly who he is. That's a picture of who he is. And you can get it in 1 minute. You get this man. Not who is from the outside, but what really boils inside him, you know. That's true artistry in terms of improvisation. So it's not about just being simple, just being melodic, just being very difficult, just being progressive in terms of moving the borders, but it's about combining the two. Can you think of other musicians that has that quality? There are many others.
Yeah, I think Miles.
Miles has the same thing, yes. And you don't have to go to Trumpland either. You can find them in Europe, you can find them in here, you can find them in many places. But that's, I think, what you can aspire to as an improvising musician. It's not, what to say, once you have both, you have developed a distinct complexity in your approach to music, and you can combine that with the simplicity, and both of those represent you, then you can really, really, really express something truly deeply, and you have the possibility of playing enormous solos, because basically you're just doing what you have to do, right? Because you're just saying, this is who I am. You have gotten to that level where you can sort of just depict who you are. No, but just to recapitulate, what I wanted to show you was that there are endless possibilities of, once you have sort of done that imitate, assimilate, or emulate, and then create. One of the ways of getting to the next step is by developing your own strategies for solo. And mostly there are strategies for getting into the flow of music making. They are not intellectual exercises. They're just devices in order for you to get up to that high dive and to actually jump, right? Because once you're in the air, there's nothing you can do. You can be afraid or you can enjoy it. And I recommend that you enjoy it. And I was not trying to give you my list. I was trying to make you reflect about what your lists could be like. What your potential devices or interventions for trying to change your personality, not change your personality, sorry, that's the wrong word, but trying to challenge yourself in order to discover who you truly are, what you really like. And one of the things that I recommend, a lot of jazz teachers says, that phrase, all keys, you have to learn it in blah, blah, blah. I don't like that approach. Because I think, and perhaps for piano and guitar it's easier to do it, but most instruments have the very, very, very strict idiomatic, the saxophone, there's probably no stupider instrument than the saxophone.
Why?
Although sax is overrated, I'm telling you. I've spent 50 years of my life trying to understand what the genius is about. There's no genius about it. It's a stupid instrument. And it's basically a lot of things that instrument can't do. So why do you try to learn to do it when it's working against the instrument? Work with the instrument at least. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I think it's the same for piano and guitar too. There are just places you don't go because it's not made for that kind of excursions, you know. So that's sort of in terms of becoming a personal musician instead of becoming a very adept and very sort of flexible musician. I would encourage you to go into the more idiomatic areas of your specific instruments.